As I'm talking, if you have questions, please feel free to stop me. Otherwise, we're short on time, so you probably won't get your questions answered. And forgive me for coughing from time to time. That's my 9/11 gift. And the more I talk, the more I cough. But just bear with me on that. On that particular day, as it was already explained, I was assistant commissioner at the New York City Department of Investigation. I was actually a block and a half away, and I actually did 30 years there, not 20. And I was the ranking manager in the agency at the time. The commissioner and deputy commissioner never made it in because when the attacks happened, streets got cut off and roads were cut off, they couldn't get in. So I was in charge of 600 investigators, police officers, and civilian staff. I wish we had a lot of time because there's so many stories I can share with you and the experiences that I went through that is really, I'd like to make you a part of, but we just don't have that kind of time, so I'm going to give you just one of the things that we experienced on that particular day. I had dispatched a group of about 200 detectives and investigators down to 9/11 when I saw the buildings got hit. I didn't see the first plane hit, but I saw the results of it. I did see the second plane hit. And my office actually faced the towers because it's a block and a half away. It's on Liberty Street. Liberty turns into Main, and I could see it. And when the first plane hit, I'm looking out my window, and you can see all the debris coming out from where the planes hit. And I had some of my detectives come to me and ask what they want to do, so I dispatched 200 people down to help it. We figured at that time it was just a small plane that hit the towers, and we just needed to get down there and help. I actually had someone on my staff who was assigned to the terrorist task force at the time, because we're part of the terrorist task force. And he hadn't called me and said that there were anything about any terrorism. I reached out to him. He didn't know anything about any terrorism, so we weren't concerned at that point, other than the fact that people needed help. We sent the 200 people down. Things are getting sort of chaotic at that point. And I'm looking out the window, and you can see debris coming out of the window. But when you saw the debris coming out, it sort of like came down at a faster pace than paper should. And what I realized that what I was looking at was people jumping. There were people who had just realized that for everybody who was above where the planes hit, there was no way we were ever going to get to them. It just wasn't going to happen. There was no technology. We didn't have the ability to get to them. There was no firefight apparatus that was going to get there. So there were people who just decided that I'm going to go out the way that I want to go out. So people were literally jumping out the windows. As a matter of fact, the first firefighter that died from a body hitting him coming down. That's not that well known, but that's a fact. So we're watching that, and when the first building came down, I was standing in my office window, looking as it happened. I couldn't go down at that point because I said I was the ranking member on staff, so I had to stay to coordinate. But I had 200 people down there, and I had a group of new investigators who had just started like 3 weeks before. They were just finishing training, and they were actually banging on my door telling me they want to go home. And I'm like, I don't have time to deal with you guys that you want to go home. There's a crisis going on, but that didn't sway them. The first building came down, and I know you guys aren't from New York, but Liberty Street, you might have come down Liberty Street by the Burger King and Tribute Center. It's kind of a narrow street, and it gets more and more narrow as you go up it. So it creates a wind tunnel. So when the first building came down, this huge brown cloud came up Liberty Street. And there were literally hundreds of people running up Liberty Street trying to get away from it. And I watched that cloud overtake those people, and they disappeared. And the amount of time it took for the cloud to go away, to dissipate, and we see it clearly again, it wasn't possible for that many people to have just gone, and run up the streets. What I'm told by some engineers and firefighters and other people is that some of those people just evaporated from the heat and the intensity of what was going on there. They were just gone. And it was this huge brown cloud. And when it came toward the building, it shook the building. And at this point, I'm realizing that people are dead. A few minutes more. Now, the second plane hits. I had already hit, actually. And when the second building came down, it was a black cloud. I don't know why one was brown and one was black. There has to be some scientists, engineers in the crowd that could tell me. 15 years, nobody's told me yet. But one was brown, one was black. When the black cloud came, the same thing happened. People running up Liberty Street, the cloud overtakes them, and they're gone. The cloud hits the building shakes, and now I have people in my office who are screaming, I want to go home. And I'm standing there looking out the window. Actually, I stood to the side because somebody said, boss, you probably should get out of the window, with this cloud coming at you, which was a good piece of advice. And I realized as I'm looking out the window after the cloud passes through that I've got 200 people down there, and right now, I don't know if they're alive or dead. I'm assuming at the level of destruction that some, if not all of them, have to be dead at this point. And I'm looking out the window and I'm realizing that I'm in charge. Most of these people I've worked with for 20 years or more, and at that time I had 20 years in, and I'm thinking to myself at this point that how am I going to tell their families, people who I know, who I hang out with on weekends sometimes, that their loved one is dead because of decisions that I made or didn't make? And I sort of like froze in the window looking out, trying to figure out that, how do you deal with that? But then people are yelling behind me, asking for direction, and I realized that I don't have time to ponder that. I've got to deal with the situation that is. So we went about trying to get people together and figure out what was going on at that point. Then I also realized that on that particular day, I actually had an undercover operation going on at the World Trade Center. Because as she had mentioned, we do corruption cases. A lot of the corruption cases involve doing undercover operations. I had an individual who was going to pay some $10,000 bribe that day not to write some violations on some property that he had. If you ever watched 60 Minutes when it first happened, and 60 Minutes plays a tape recording of the planes hitting the building, that's the tape my undercover was wearing that day. She didn't go there with the intent of recording that. She went there with the intent of recording a $10,000 payoff, which we never got. So when the planes hit, we recorded that. I realized that I've got 200 people down here who are probably dead. I don't know where my investigator is who's doing the undercover operation. She was with an FBI agent and a Secret Service agent. I don't know where any of them are at this point. And I've got a bunch of young kids who are yelling at me they want to go home. I get the people together that I can get. I take some of my staff and I say, go downstairs, get as many cars as you can, and take these guys to the Brooklyn Bridge so they can go home. But at this point, they're burdened now because they're not really being of any help to me. So get them wherever they need to go. And I walk out of the building, and when you walk out of the building, it was sort of like a nuclear winter. I mean, the ash is coming down, and it felt like snow. Like when snow first comes down, it's nice and light and fluffy. That's what it was like, but it was gray. And when you walked on it, it was like the first snow that comes down. But then when you looked around, there were people walking around covered in soot from head to toe, and they were like zombies. They had no idea where they were going. We'd stop them and ask them their names. They couldn't give you their names. And we just went about trying to clean them up. And the more we did that, the more people came. And we just went into the stores in the neighborhood and just took all the water out of the drugstores and grocery stores and just, to clean people up. The guy gave me a $10,000 bill at the end of this, as a matter of fact. The drugstore did. But that's another story. So we're cleaning these people up, and I noticed there's a guy in the corner on the outside, and he's laying there and he's crying in pain. And I remembered seeing him when I first came in the building. He was on a scaffold. And when I walked over to him, I could see that his leg had broken. He was on the scaffold when the building came down, and it knocked him off the scaffold. And I knew his leg was broken because his bone was sticking out of the skin. And he's standing there screaming in pain. And at this point, I'm not really sure what to do for him because that's not what I do. So we took him inside, cleaned him up as much as we could. And I'm going about the day because hours were passing by, and you're just trying to get people cleaned up, trying to get people to where they needed to be. You're getting requests coming in from different places, of being a first responder, things that they need you to do. And I'm standing in the lobby of the building, and I'm giving out direction, and I see somebody coming through the revolving doors of our building. And it looked like one of my guys, but because he was covered in soot from head to toe, I couldn't really tell. And as he's walking toward me, I could feel my legs getting weak, and I was trying to back up I could feel myself walking away from him, because I really didn't want to hear what he had to say, because at this point I'm figuring he's coming to tell me that everybody's dead. Because hours had passed at this point, and we're only a block and a half away, so if they hadn't come back by now, they're not coming back. And as he's walking toward me, I literally felt myself, going back, trying to get away from him. And I could hear him saying boss, and I could hear people behind me talking to me, but at this point, their voices were like, I wasn't hearing anything they were saying, and I definitely didn't want to hear what this guy was saying. And then he said to me, boss. And I said, yeah. And he said, we're all okay. He said, everybody's across the street, and we all made it back. Nobody's hurt. We're all just fine. And I literally just fell onto the desk. Not so much. It was just out of relief. It was relief. It was anger. It was a whole range of emotions that I couldn't even explain to you at this point. And if you don't believe in God, that's a reason to believe in God. To have 200 people there, and they all make it back, not just safely, but completely unharmed. Prayers do get answered, and I know that there were other people who didn't make it home, but the 200 that I sent down there that day, they all made it back. Now, some of us have 9/11 related illnesses, like myself. Yes, ma'am.
Did they ever say how it was that they survived?
Most of them who told me stories jumped in ambulances, under trucks.
Or they got under something?
They got under things.
Okay.
Almost everybody on my staff just jumped under stuff. In ambulances, some of them were actually trapped inside vehicles that they had jumped into for a period of time. But it's basically everybody just running and jumping into things and hiding in different places. I think because they were all together, they all did the same things, and doing the same thing, brought them all home safely. Any other questions? So that's the way we dealt with it that day. And usually when I tell the story, I get sort of teary-eyed because I tell other stories that don't really bother me, but that one does, because it's just that in that particular day, to see that guy come through the door, it was just an emotion that you just don't deal with. I mean, I spent 4 months down in the rescue recovery effort after that, and I developed a cough after a while. Going into February, March, I got this really terrible cough, and I had the cough for 10 years. It turns out that myself, like other first responders, developed a condition called sarcoidosis, where I have these spots in my lungs. So I spent 10 years on steroids, and I got off it about 2 years ago. My cough came back about beginning of January, so I'm back on steroids again, but I'm about to come off. But I had this serious cough to the point where people thought I had tuberculosis. They didn't even want to sit around me. They thought that they were going to catch something. But I also have a condition in my legs. My muscles are always inflamed. My legs always hurt. When I get up in the morning, it's not about whether they're going to hurt. It's just about how much they're going to hurt. And I know when I leave here, they're going to hurt because I'm standing here for this period of time. They'll hurt, but I'm used to that at this point. But my most recent issue with all this is that when my cough came back in January, I went to my pulmonologist, and he did an MRI, one of the initials, I forget which one that he did, but to see what my lungs were doing and see why I was coughing again. And we were able to clear that up, but he said to me, I noticed when we were looking at your MRI of your lungs that your liver looked slightly inflamed, and you should go and get that checked out. So it seems that now the sarcoidosis has now traveled to my liver and has had some sort of impact on my liver, so we got to treat that. And a couple of years ago, when I was taking some of the medications they gave me for the lungs, it had a negative impact on my kidneys, so my kidneys are beginning to shut down a little bit too, but I'm still here. And I don't worry about those kinds of things. I don't worry about things I can't control. I worry about the things I can control. And if I can control it, then why worry about it, right? Are you raising your hand or just stretching? Oh, okay.
Excuse me, why don't we just leave the questions until the end, if you don't mind, okay? It'll just work more smoothly that way.
So just real quick, and I'll stop just to share one of the things that we had to I was assigned to escort water trucks, because the day the buildings first came down, we didn't know what was happening as far as the terror attacks at this point. So the deputy commissioner for the agency who was responsible for supplying things to the rescue effort, he came to me and said that we got water trucks coming in from New Jersey because all the water was shut down here, the fire hydrants weren't working and everything wasn't working. Can you go and escort the trucks? I said, fine, who's going with me? He said, well, I don't have anybody to go with you. I said, well, how many trucks are there? He said, well, there's 9 trailers coming in filled with water, and you need to go and escort them in. I'm like, that doesn't make any sense. What makes you think, if you think they're going to be attacked by terrorists, that I'm going to be able to stop these people? And he said, well, Vin, I've worked with you in the past, and I figured if anybody can do this, you can do it, and I don't have anybody else. And I didn't have anybody else at this point because all my people were involved in the rescue recovery effort. So I went up to my office, I got my guns, and I got 8 boxes of ammo. I threw it on the seat, and got my shoulder holster on, and I'm leaving here, and I'm going out to Staten Island, ready to do battle. And I'm thinking all along the way is that, if there's going to be a fight, I'm ready. Now, I have no idea what kind of fight there's going to be, but I just thinking, because when you're training for this, I trained for all kinds of stuff. I never trained what to do when the building gets hit by an airplane, but I've trained for if you're going to be in a gunfight, you shoot first. Don't ask any questions. If it's going to be, I just shoot. Ask the questions later. So I'm ready to do battle, and I'm shutting down soon. And I get there, and I talked to the drivers who were there. I met them on the Staten Island Expressway, and we talked about how we're going to get back, and I brought them back down here. to Ground Zero. But it wasn't until about 2 years ago when I was actually doing a tour at Tribute Center, because people are always asking me questions and stuff, but somebody asked, and I usually tell it like in quick sound bites just to keep things moving, but this lady asked me a question about the trip back from Staten Island. And I realized at that point that I don't remember it. I remember meeting them, and I remember getting out of my vehicle, and it was right in front of Tribute Center, where Tribute Center is right now. I know they got back here, but the trip itself, I have absolutely no memory of it at all. I don't know how we got here. I know it had to have probably been across the Manhattan Bridge, because trailers can't cross the Brooklyn Bridge. But as far as how we got there, I don't know how. And I didn't realize until 10 years later that that was a part of my memory that's just completely gone. You know, I remember meeting, I remember getting here, but the trip itself, I've tried to figure it out. You know, I've had people ask me questions, see if I could, because in doing investigations, I do all kinds of memory techniques, so I figured I even tried it on myself, and I have no memory of that trip. Don't know how it happened. And is my time up, or do I have another minute? My time is up. Oh, well. Are there any questions, or? Okay. Thank you.